Hello and welcome back to Graphing Quadratics. Yesterday we looked at it as standard form. Today we're going to look at it in vertex form. Now the benefit of vertex form, there are a couple of them. One, our vertex will be staring us right in the face. We won't have to do anything to solve. When you have something that's in standard form, if you want to find the vertex, there is an algebraic way to do it. We did not look over that just because of the fact that we're doing the distance learning now and you have Desmos. But vertex form, it tells you what your vertex is right away. The other advantage to vertex form is the fact that it allows you to look at a transformation of your quadratic graph. What I mean by that is when you look at vertex form, it will allow you to see, is it going to, compared to the original graph, which would just be y equals x squared, is your graph going to slide up, slide down, slide left, slide right, open up, open down, all sorts of things. So let's look at what is, just as a refresher, what's standard form. Alright, so standard form was the f of x equals ax squared plus bx plus c. And remember, f of x is really the same thing as us saying that we have 0. And then what is vertex form? So vertex form, we're going to have f of x is equal to a x, that's a bad x, let me fix that, x minus h squared plus k. Now it's going to look a little bit differently, and the only letter that we have that overlaps outside of the letter x, the only letter that overlaps with this is going to be the a. Now a is an important letter with this because of two reasons. A is going to give you the direction it opens, and it's also going to tell you if it is wide or narrow. Okay. Now in vertex form, h and k, that's going to actually be your vertex. H and k. And the important thing to note about this is your formula has minus h. So when you're looking at your vertex, and I'm gonna graph one by hand on this next slide. When you're looking at your vertex though, whatever sign is in front of that h, you need to take the opposite of it to be able to come up with your vertex. K is just straight up. If the formula has the plus there, so what you see is what you get. Alright. Okay, so I'm going to graph this one by hand just to talk a little bit about it. Remember, with graphing, everything that you do is going to be from Desmos. But I want to graph it by hand because there's a couple things that I want to point out with this, especially when it comes to the max and min and how we would identify those. So this is, in fact, in vertex form. So it's in a x minus h squared plus k form. It's in vertex form. So what that means is when I'm looking for my vertex, I need to glance right here at these two things. Now remember my formula, I wanted it to say minus h. Now since my equation says minus 4, that means when I'm looking at coming up with my vertex, vertex, my vertex is actually located at 4, comma, and then it says plus 2, so I want positive 2. That means when I go to graph this thing, I know that the vertex is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Is going to be in this location right here. Now, A, which is right here, there's no number there, but there is a negative sign, which means A is negative 1, meaning that my parabola is going to open down. It's going to look like a hill, right? It's going to look like the letter N, kind of. Now, if we were in school and learning how to do this by hand, which we would, what we would end up doing is we would end up looking for making a chart. and we would be plugging in x values with the middle being the vertex, and then we would go on both sides to one space apart. So if I go 3, 2, I'm going to go 5, 6 as well. And I would have to plug those in and see what value do I get back when I plug in the fact that x is equal to 3, is equal to 2. So I would have to plug in 3 minus 4 is negative 1. You square that, you get positive 1, but you have a negative sign in front, so it's going to wind up giving me 1. 5 does the same thing. Now for you guys, you have Desmos that you would be plugging in with this, but I don't have Desmos on this screen, so I can't really show you that information right now. 2 minus 4 is negative 2, squared is 4, opposite of that is negative, so negative 2. So this would be my parabola. This would be the points that I would need to graph. 3, 1, 5, 1, 2, negative 2, and then 6, negative 2. So my graph would end up looking, and I'm going to curve my line the best that I can, my graph would end up looking like this. That side and this side. Now, the thing that I want to show you guys is when it comes to saying max or min. We already found what our vertex was, because we labeled it right here. But then we're trying to identify, is that a max or is that a min? Well, that would be a maximum at 2. All right, when you're listing max and mins, you're looking at the y values. So this is a maximum value of 2 because 2 is the highest value that we get on the y direction. Okay, so that's the maximum value. If I'm looking for my axis of symmetry, AOS, that's equal to x being 4. Okay, so your vertex actually tells you both of these pieces of information. It tells you your axis of symmetry, and it tells you your maximum or minimum value. All right, so we have that the axis of symmetry would be right here, which means everything is a mirror image from the left side to the right side. All right, and solutions, I know that I would have 2 solutions. Okay, so I know that I would have 2. I don't exactly 100% know what the values are. Based off of my graph, it looks like it would be something around 2.5, maybe 2.5 is one of them, and then the other one would be 3, 4, 5, 5.5, some decimal that's there. But I know I have an answer between 2 and 3, and then between 5 and 6. All right, so that's what we're looking at in standard form. Now, if you want to play around with the Desmos and play around with some of the values of it, take your equation like this, that's right here. So say a parenthesis x minus h squared plus k, and you can add slide values to a, h, and k, and play around with sliding those bars and see what happens. So see if h changes value. What does that do to your graph? If k changes value, what does that do? If a changes value, how does that affect it? All right. So I would recommend playing around with those, because when you get to looking at your quadratics again in Algebra 2, you're going to have to know how those values affect your quadratic. So I'm going to pop in for practice. I'm going to pop in 3 questions for you guys to graph with Desmos to give some information on. And then I think I'm also going to give one where I'm going to have you play around with it. I'm going to ask you what happens when h changes. What happens when k changes? What happens when a changes? Just those separately, just to see if you can kind of figure out what do those do to your quadratic. All right. So that's the only video. That's the last video that we have for the week. There won't be any more. There's no check-in this week as well, because we are going to actually combine it with what we do next week. So I hope you guys have a great week, great weekend, and I will see you next week. And actually, before I sign off with this, there is one more thing that I wanted to talk about, and it would be domain and range. So domain and range. Now, early in the year, we did talk about these. You need to remember that domain is everything that you can plug in, which when it comes to quadratics, your domain is all real numbers. You can plug in whatever x value you want. Your range, however, you can't get whatever you want back. And this has to play with max and min. Okay, so this part right here will be related to this. If the maximum value you can get is 2, that means your range would be all real values that are less than or equal to 2. Okay, so just to refresh on that, domain is what you plug in, range is what you get back. And when it comes to a quadratic, you can plug in anything that you want 99.9% of the time. You cannot, however, get back every single number. There's either going to be a maximum that you can get or a minimum that you can get. So that means you're either going to have all your real numbers that are greater than something, greater than or equal to something, or less than or equal to something. Now I'll see you guys in the next video.